I didn't suspect anything. Okay, maybe I should explain this a little more. I didn't suspect anything because I didn't notice any obvious signs at that time. Looking back, I see that the signs were there, but I was too in love with my wife Angela and trusted her too much to recognize them. But then why would I look for them? We were a loving and devoted couple, right? Well, maybe one of us. She became a little distant, maybe a little preoccupied, seemed irritable and more controlling than usual. But when I asked her if everything was okay, she replied, "It's just workload, honey. Don't worry. It'll all work out in time." Because I loved and trusted my wife with all my heart, my stupid, deluded heart, I took her at her word. Yes, stupid me. In fact, I became an orphan at a late age. My parents were returning from a church youth conference where they had volunteered every year since they were teenagers when a drunk driver crashed into their car. The only consolation for us who knew and loved them was that they most likely died instantly due to the force of the impact. The drunk driver also died in the accident. At first it seemed like it would simply be a matter of filing a claim with the driver's insurer, but then a local TV station received an anonymous tip. Someone sent them a copy of the security footage of the bar where he was drinking, and it was obvious that the bar staff continued to give him alcohol when it was already clear that he was very drunk. One bar employee was shown on video telling his colleagues to stop serving him alcohol and begging them to call him a taxi. They laughed at her, calling her a coward, and the scene switched to a security camera outside. Although there was no sound, it was obvious that the staff were helping him into the car as he was unable to stand without assistance. The station sent copies of the video to the police, the district attorney, and me because someone at the station went to the same church as my parents and vaguely knew me. Naturally, chaos ensued because the bar was clearly in violation of the strict Texas bar law, which prohibited the sale of alcohol to drunk customers. The bar owner tried to claim that the bar had provided employees with training to avoid serving alcohol to visibly intoxicated customers. That defense failed because the bar owner was himself filmed serving alcohol to a drunk customer several times during the evening. The defense also failed because one of the bartenders apparently testified that he had argued with colleagues, including his boss, that the customer should no longer be served alcohol and should be sent to a taxi. The latest legal blow was that the owner was filmed telling his employees to half-lift the drunk and put him in the damn car. Since they clearly violated bar laws, they had no defense. The owner's license was revoked, criminal charges were filed, and the drunk driver's widow and I hired the same lawyer to sue them. Her situation was worse than mine, of course. She was a housewife with 3 children, all under 12 years of age. Her husband was a highly successful lawyer and a recovering alcoholic who went astray, and these idiots got him drunk until he couldn't stand and then forced him to drive to kill himself and my parents. The bar owner settled the claims through his lawyer. The driver's widow received $14 million, and I received $7 million. Her compensation was higher because she filed the claim on behalf of herself and her children. Believe it or not, our case was not a record settlement under the Texas bar law. That record still stands at $31 million, as far as I know. I put the money in a bank account designed to generate interest and left it there. When Angela and I got married, I changed the account so that access to the money required both my wife's and my signature. Despite my protests, Angela insisted that we both sign the rather rigid prenuptial agreement that she had prepared. I didn't know why I left the money there. I just couldn't bring myself to do anything with them. I didn't even want to look at my balance on the internet. However, we did not need money since both my wife and I had high incomes. Finally, I decided that I needed to understand why I couldn't do anything with this money. My wife's job required a lot of out-of-state travel, and I decided to take advantage of one of her longer business trips to visit my advisor and discuss my money problems and why I couldn't spend it or even look at my balance online. We established that money was my last connection with my parents. He believed I had 2 problems with this. Firstly, it felt like I was profiting from my parents' death, but also that if I spent the money or even looked at the balance, it would be an acknowledgement of their death. I admit that that last moment brought me to tears, but it was a cathartic moment, and after I wiped my tears away, I shook his hand and left his office feeling better than I had in a long time. I returned home and decided to at least look at the money in the account, which I had not done before, even if I did not spend it right away. I would certainly ask my wife her opinion when she gets home. Home repairs, extension, buying a new home, cruise, starting a new business, starting your own family, looking for investment opportunities. All these ideas were floating around in my head, but they all fell apart when I opened the banking application on the computer and noticed that although I did not log into the account, someone did because the money was disappearing from the account in regular monthly payments. A cold feeling came over me. Damn it, my account has clearly been hacked. I looked at the time, it was still relatively early, and the bank was still open for a few hours. So I decided that rather than waste time making a phone call or using online access, I would go to the bank branch in person. When I arrived, I approached the tellers and said, "Hello, I'm David King, and I would like to report fraud on my bank account. May I speak to a fraud officer?" Her smile froze, and she asked for my name and account details, which I provided her with a printout. She looked through them and said, "Mr. King, may I keep this document for a while? Thank you. Please go to office number 1 on the other side of the lobby, please." I thanked her and walked into one of 3 large glass-fronted private booths on the other side of the lobby. I waited 10 minutes before a young man entered the room and closed the door behind him. "Hello, Mr. King. My name is Byron James. I am one of the account managers at First Mercantile Bank. You are reporting fraudulent activity on the wealth generator account you have with us. The only activity I see is regular monthly money transfers from your account, which you and your wife established 6 months ago." He stopped and handed me a piece of paper. "Here it is, sir. This is the document you and your wife signed back then." I looked at the paper, examined the signatures at the bottom of the form, and noticed that one signature was made by a certain Mr. or Mrs. C. Squiggle. I also noticed something else. My wife's signature looked like hers, but the signature against my name didn't look like mine at all. Even approximately, just a squiggle. I returned the paper to him. "Thank you. But you see, that's why I wanted to talk to the fraud officer and not the account manager. Nothing personal, of course, but you see, it may be my wife's signature, but it is definitely not my signature. Please call someone from your fraud department." He looked distressed and replied, "No hard feelings, Mr. King, sir. I'll call someone from the fraud department for you. It'll take a little time." After another wait, this time a little longer, a woman entered the room. She introduced herself with a handshake. She sat down opposite me. She was quite tall, attractive, but she had suspicious, interrogating eyes. Obviously the result of working in a bank fraud department, I thought to myself. "Hello, Mr. Kisau King. My name is Amanda Fellows. I am a bank fraud officer. Can you please tell me why you suspect there have been fraudulent transactions in your account?" I explained that although this was, as far as I could tell, my wife's signature on the form, it was not my signature, that I had not seen the form and certainly did not approve of setting up automatic funds transfer or monthly payments for the last 6 months. She compared my signature with the one on the transfer form and pursed her lips for a moment. She nodded. "Yes, I understand, Mr. King. The total amount of money transferred is now $60,000. Why didn't you know about these transfers?" I explained why I had not looked at the account and why I had looked at it for the first time since I opened the account several years ago. She nodded with a sympathetic expression on her face. "Yes, I can understand that." She logged into the computer sitting on the table in the interview room and began purposefully pressing keys and moving the mouse slightly. "What I do now is disable the automatic transfer and also send a chargeback order to the bank that received the money stating that we believe the account there was involved in a fraudulent transfer of funds." She pressed the accented enter key and said, "That's it. Now I'm going to pull up our archived video footage from the bank's internal and external CCTV from the date the automatic transfer was set and see who did it. After some more typing on the keyboard, the large screen in the room lit up with a series of paused video screens. "Do you really keep the video recordings for that long?" I asked. "Yes, in the old days we kept them for 90 days, but since we switched from VHS to digital recording, we just upload them to our cloud server and leave them there indefinitely. And this is one of those cases where this turns out to be a useful policy. By the way, where is your wife now?" "She's at a business conference in Palm Springs. Why do you ask?" She smiled briefly. "Just out of curiosity, I guess." She watched the video until 3 different views appeared on the screen. They were dated and time-stamped. We saw my wife and a man slightly taller than her. He was wearing a rather bad dark wig. I didn't recognize him from this angle. Apparently, they had an appointment, as the receptionist led them into one of the interview rooms. Not the one we were in, I noticed. When they sat down in the room with the bank employee, the camera in the room gave a good view of him. By reflex, I looked at the camera in the room where we were. This time I recognized him. "Do you recognize him?" "Yes, I know him. I've met him a few times. He's a colleague of my wife. I think his name is Andrew Carter." She nodded. "Yes, this is confirmed by the fact that the name on the account into which your money was transferred was in the name of Andrew W. Carter at Texas Mutual Bank." She paused before speaking again. "Mr. King, we will have to report this to the authorities. My hands are tied, unfortunately." I shrugged. "Looks like my wife is cheating on me, so I think the book should be thrown at her." "Yes, I understand. However, bank fraud is a federal crime, so I have to report it to the federal prosecutor and the FBI." I shrugged. She wrote something on a sticky note and handed it to me. "I don't know if this will interest you, but this is the name of the private investigator we use at the bank, and his contact information is here. I'm very sorry that you found out about your wife and her colleague in this way." I thanked her, we shook hands, and I left the bank, heading into another, uncertain world. I called the private investigator from my car on the way home. I scheduled a Zoom meeting for that evening. As I walked from the car to the house, I received a text message from my wife. It was all in capital letters. "It's not what it seems. I can explain everything. Don't do anything." I thought, this should be interesting. Apparently, she and her lover found out their scam was exposed when the refund order magically returned my money. I answered Angela, "Are you coming home now to explain why it is not what it seems? Can you tell me what it is, if not what it seems, and what else should I not do?" Quite quickly, given the circumstances, she replied, "Don't involve the authorities. They don't need to know about this. And I'm sorry, but I can't go home right now. This work conference is very important, and although I know you want to see me, in order for me to explain everything, I must stay here until the end of the conference on Thursday. I hope you know that I love you." I replied, "As you say." The Zoom meeting with a private investigator from Greater Houston Investigations went well, better than I expected. Barry Greer was a former military police investigator, and he really knew his stuff. After I told him my sad story, he was sympathetic. "So, you believe that your wife is cheating on you with a coworker, Andrew Carter, and they both work at Lightworks Marketing in Houston. But they are currently at a work conference in Palm Springs at the Palm Springs Convention Center. I have an investigator that I use in Palm Springs," he said. "If you want, I can assign him to investigate your wife and her lover starting today." "How about now?" was my answer. "No problem, although it might be expensive." I shrugged. Yes, I assumed that would be the case, given that the investigation will take place both here in Texas and in California. However, I need to know what is going on, so cost will not be a barrier within reason. Certainly. I paid the initial amount with my debit card, and we ended the call. Greer was on top of his game and immediately took the case to Palm Springs. In fact, I received my first report from them the next morning at 11 a.m. my time, which was 9 a.m. Palm Springs time. It was a pretty boring report. Angela and Carter shared a room, although she was supposed to stay in her own room. They went down for breakfast, and it was obvious from the report that they were upset. They said things like, "How could he do that? Is everything gone?" "Yes." "Every last bit?" "Yes." "Bastard, every last one. I'll arrange it for him when we get home." "No, don't do this. You'll be locked up, and besides, I don't want him to get hurt." It was unpleasant and completely uncharacteristic of what I knew about Angel, or what I thought I knew about her. Private investigators in California and Texas were able to gather enough evidence to prove they were having an affair. This was important to me because I wanted to file for divorce based on fault, citing adultery as the basis. This was possible in Texas because it was a fault and no-fault divorce state. The courts still required evidence, which I obtained from Greer and his colleagues in California. Angela returned home on Thursday. She picked up her car from the Houston airport. Before she left for the conference, we joked about the early flight, since the only direct flight from Palm Springs to Houston left around 6 a.m. She dragged her suitcase through the door and looked terrible. She was angry. "What the hell have you done, moron?" God, she was angry. I decided to use the old biblical trick of pouring coals on her head. "Yes, Angela, I accept your apology for cheating on me and helping your lover steal $60,000 from me." She was stunned for a few seconds before she spoke again. "Did you really need to get the FBI involved in this case?" I shook my head. "Sorry, honey, but this has nothing to do with me." When the bank discovered fraud at their main branch, they were quite outraged. They told me it was like a teacher at school discovering that a child was being abused, and they are obliged to report this to the police. It turns out that banks are obliged to report fraud against the bank. She tried to soften her anger. "Well, okay, but why did you check the account? Didn't you trust me?" "That's not the case, but when I looked at the account and noticed the transactions, I panicked. I thought the account had been hacked, so I reported it to the bank." "Why didn't you call me?" Her voice began to sound a little whiny. I shrugged. "I never thought of calling you. It just didn't occur to me. When I found out that the transfers were arranged by you and your lover, I felt like my life was over." "Why did you look at the bill? You never look at the bill." She sounded accusing, somehow, like it was my fault. I explained to her why I looked at the bill after the session with my therapist, and the guilty expression softened the somewhat sour expression that had previously been on her face. "Damn. Oh, David, I'm so sorry. That must have hurt." I sat down at the table and invited her to sit down, too. "How long have you been cheating on me, Ange?" She denied that she actually cheated on me. She began to explain how Andrew needed someone to talk to about his family problems. Angela told me that she was a shoulder he could lean on, someone he could open his heart to. His wife didn't understand him. She was cruel, she was violent, and he wanted to leave the marriage, but he didn't know how, and he needed help and advice. I was shocked that my usually intelligent wife could fall for such obvious nonsense. "Oh, honey, come on. He was deceiving you, and you were stupid enough to believe it." She looked offended by my obvious disdain for his tale of family troubles. "This is true. Anyway, why did you and him steal money from the account?" "Oh, we didn't really steal them, Dave. We just borrowed them. We'd give them back as soon as he could leave his witch wife and settle down away from her." I shook my head, not believing what I was hearing. "Angela, you were his friend and confidant. Were you also his lover? Did you cheat on me with Carter?" "No, dear, never. I was not his mistress. Honestly, you have to believe me." I thought, "No, bitch, I shouldn't trust you." I looked at her for a few seconds and said, "But you slept in the same room in Palm Springs, didn't you?" She nodded. "And have you ever had sex with him?" This time she shrugged slightly, more like a nervous tic. "Well, did you have sex with him? Is he your lover? Did you cheat on me?" "We had sex, but he's not my lover and I didn't cheat on you. Sex with Andrew was different from sex with you. I only had sex with you because I love you. I only had sex with Andrew, because I, I felt sorry for him, for what he was going through with the witch. That's bullshit, Angela. You're having sex with someone other than your spouse, and that's cheating, even if, as you claim, it's just pathetic sex with your lover. A thought suddenly struck me. By the way, how did you and he come up with the idea to steal money from the account? She flared with irritation again. I told you, we didn't steal them, we just borrowed them, okay? Well, how did you and him come up with the idea of just borrowing money? Oh, I don't know. We were talking one day, and the idea just popped up. Did you offer him money, or did he ask? Well, thinking back, he asked if there was any way he could borrow money from the account. I said I didn't think you would approve of this idea. A couple of days later, he asked how he could access the money, and I told him it could be done if you and I signed a request form, and that's what happened. How did Carter know about the money? How did he know that I wouldn't notice that it was gone? She frowned before speaking. I guess I should have told him that we have $7 million in the account, but that you never check your balance online for some reason, let alone withdraw money. So Carter knew that $7 million was just sitting in an account, and that with your help, it was just waiting to be taken. Who came up with the idea for him to come into the bank and pretend to be me? An expression of shock flashed across her face. He made it up. Why are you asking me? Damn, are you saying that he used me? Bingo, you pathetic, deluded bitch, I thought to myself. Sounds like it. How much money did you think he was going to take? It was only $60,000 because I accidentally stumbled upon what was going on. Otherwise, how much would it have been? $1 million? 2? All got him $7 million, with you and your lover running away to a tropical paradise without an extradition treaty? Oh, Dave, I wouldn't do that to you. Well, really? I thought. In fact, I heard a recording of their conversation in a restaurant in Palm Springs, where they were discussing countries with which the U.S. does not have extradition treaties. They talked about the Maldives, Russia, Sao Tome and Principe, Iran, Ethiopia, and Vanuatu. I had to look up Sao Tome and Principe and Vanuatu because I had never heard of them. The inclusion of Russia, Iran, and Ethiopia could mean they were joking, but who knows? I don't necessarily believe you, Angela. After all, when Carter had enough of my money to leave his wife, where would that leave you? You'd both wish each other goodbye with parting tears, perhaps garnishing the moment with a final, tender goodbye sex. Or would you keep having sex until you came home with a nasty little gift and gave me some kind of STD? She shuddered. He would never give me in sty. He loves. She suddenly stopped, imagining that she had just ruined her fantasy story that they weren't lovers. Oh, and she answered my next question very stupidly. Did they use protection? Obviously not. Luckily, a subsequent visit to the sty clinic revealed that I did not have any sexually transmitted infections, thanks to neither Angels nor Carter. We discussed what would happen next. She was worried about meeting the FBI at their office on Justice Park Drive in Houston. I advised her to take a lawyer with her and answer all their questions honestly. You see, even though I was starting to hate her, I couldn't forget that I still loved her. But this feeling of love, I was sure, would pass over time. She collected some clothes and things and went to her sister. I called the law firm I used when I sued the bar owner, and luckily they were a full-service law firm with a family law department, and for the appropriate fees, they agreed to represent me in my divorce from Angela. I made an appointment the next day, and they were practically delighted when they looked over the prenuptial agreement that Angela insisted on signing. The lawyer assigned to the divorce, Thomas Hayden, said, "It looks like a 100% ironclad prenuptial agreement. If she tries to challenge it, I doubt any judge will agree with her arguments." I was really interested. But Angela herself prepared the documents for this. Why would she try to challenge it? He shrugged. Human nature. Call it intuition, but I think she'll try to argue with it. After all, there's $7 million on the line. Your apartment is worth, what? A little over $2 million. Plus, you have certificates of deposit worth about $50,000. I could be wrong. Maybe she will accept and leave the marriage with a modest amount of money that her prenup allows her to get. But if I were a gambling person, I would bet on her trying to cancel her own prenup contract. I would like her to prove me wrong, but unfortunately, I am rarely wrong. Unfortunately, it turned out that he was right. She stayed with her sister for a couple of weeks and then found a small studio apartment a few miles away. She put most of her things in storage. Communication between us took place through our lawyers. Thomas Hayden confronted her lawyer in court and completely destroyed her. Every argument she made was answered with relevant case law and logic. Judging by their behavior as we all entered court, I think Angela and her lawyer, Karen Nelson, were very pleased that the judge was a woman. Thomas noticed this and laughed quietly. Oh my God, they're going to have a surprise. The judge presiding over the case is Jennifer Ward. She's been in family court for 15 years, so she's seen a lot of things. The thing is, she despises women who use sisterhood arguments, hates cheaters, and has a strong dislike for those who try to get out of prenups, especially when it's their own prenup. And with a federal case hanging over your wife for fraud and stealing money from an account with the man she cheated on you with, that won't go down well with Judge Ward. He was right. From the very beginning, although Judge Ward was not openly hostile, it was obvious that she had little respect for either Angela or her lawyer and would not cut them any slack. In fact, at one point, I thought she was going to hold Angela's lawyer in contempt of court. The prenuptial agreement was, example of sorts, well-researched and well-written, Judge Ward said. She asked a seemingly innocent question. Mrs. King, I see from the prenuptial agreement documents that you hired Mr. James Bell to draft it. Angela looked puzzled, as did her lawyer. Angela answered cautiously, yes, it is so. Judge Ward said, I just don't understand why, given Jim Bell has done such an excellent job of drafting the prenuptial agreement, you can't imagine yourself being divorced by him. I've known Jimmy Bell for many years. We worked in the same law firm for a couple of years, so why don't you use it? Angela's face paled, and her lawyer's face turned a beautiful shade of caught red-handed red. Judge Ward gave them both a knowing, almost predatory smile, saying, but I would suggest that it would be difficult to ask an honest lawyer like James Bell to try to find loopholes in a prenuptial agreement that he himself drafted just about a decade ago. I mean, the ink isn't even dry yet. She smiled, so I assumed it was some kind of judge-level joke. She paused for a moment and said, I am denying the motion to declare the prenuptial agreement void. This means that the only resources we need to consider are those that cover what the cheating spouse will receive under the contract. She looked at Thomas and said, Mr. Cornett Hayden, I have seen evidence collected by private investigators in Texas and California, video and audio recordings, affidavits from employees of the Palm Springs Convention Center and the adjacent hotel, and I must say that it is all very convincing evidence that Mrs. King did have adultery with a fellow employee, Mr. Andrew Carter. She looked at Angela and her lawyer. Mrs. King, Miss Nelson, do you have anything you can provide to the court to counter this evidence? Nelson said, Your Honor, may we have some time to review this so-called evidence? She tried to fake a grin, but it looked so unconvincing that it literally ran off her face to die somewhere in the corner. Judge Ward looked irritated. Oh, come on. As part of the discovery process, Mr. Hayden and Mr. King gave you copies of all the evidence a couple of months ago. Do you have anything to rebut or refute the evidence of the transcripts of Mrs. King's conversations in Palm Springs when she was in bed with her lover and told him she loved him? Or someone who could refute the affidavits of hotel maids Mercedes Garcia, Gloria Tate, or Penny Lopez that Mrs. King and Mr. Carter shared not only a room but also a bed, and that Mrs. Garcia even found them in the bed and had sex? If you don't, then I will be forced to make a decision based on the evidence I have. Do you have something to say, Miss Nelson? Oh, you should have seen it. She stated that it was just a simple, sad misunderstanding, that the path of true love was never smooth, and that she was confident that if the judge simply ordered us to undergo counseling, we could get our marriage back on the right track. Your Honor, pursuant to Texas Family Code FAM 6505, consultation, please order consultation for Mr. and Mrs. King. She sounded very emotional about this. I felt uneasy, but Thomas squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "Calm down, just watch how everything unfolds." Yes. The judge delayed her answer. She took off her glasses, wiped them on the edge of her robes, put them back on, and frowned for a moment. "No, sorry, Miss Nelson, but I am fully aware of the provisions of Texas law." Judging by the expression on Angela's lawyer's face, it was clear that she realized she had made a mistake. "I'm not going to waste my court's or Mr. King's time by ordering him to go to marriage counseling with a woman who cheated on him while married to him." She looked at me. "Mr. King, would you go to marriage counseling with Mrs. King?" I thought for a moment because I realized that shouting, "Hell no," not a good idea in court. "Your Honor, after some consideration, I wouldn't go. I mean, if you force me to go, I wouldn't want to violate a court order. But frankly, I wouldn't want to be in therapy with my wife, my ex-wife. More precisely, I would just sit there and not participate." The judge smiled at me and nodded. "Miss Nelson, Mr. King has lost his footing. He caught his wife helping her lover steal $60,000 from his wrongful death and Texas bar law settlement after the tragic deaths of his parents shortly before his marriage to Mrs. Key King. And Mr. Cans King is absolutely right. The law says that he must attend a meeting with a court-appointed therapist, but the law does not say that he must participate. So I will not order counseling or family therapy. What I will do is consider all the evidence in this case, and I will make a decision in 7 days. 7 days later, we were all back in court and Judge Ward addressed us. After reviewing the evidence and hearing both sides, I render judgment that the marriage between Mr. Basir and Mrs. Rohr King is over, and I grant the claim for divorce solely on the grounds of Mrs. King's adultery. That's all. A 10-year marriage ended because my wife, now ex-wife, turned out to be an idiot who fell for a scammer's trick. Yes, I hired a private investigator to check on Carter. His wife was a petite and attractive woman, the mother of his 2 children and a third on the way. Of course, she did not abuse her husband, and there was not even a hint of divorce between them. Well, at least until I sent a pack of evidence to Mrs. Carter. It also turns out that Carter is not actually Carter. His real name was Andrew Minton, and he had convictions for fraud and theft before he changed his identity and married his wife. The poor woman had no idea about his double life. Was it cruel of me to send her information? Was this an attempt to bring someone else into her misfortune by sending her information? Not in any way. I knew that if I were her, I would want to know what kind of a bastard my husband was. He also put Angela and I at risk of contracting a sexually transmitted infection because I doubt Angela was his only lover, and he also put his poor, unsuspecting wife at risk. Perhaps even HIV. I understand that HIV is no longer considered the death sentence it once was, but still, why should his wife and I be put at risk? She contacted me through my lawyer and thanked me for being so helpful to her. She hired my lawyer to get every last penny from her hubby. A few weeks after our divorce was finalized, Angela and I met to sign some paperwork, insurance policies, a few investments that weren't covered in the prenup that we needed to share, and so on. She looked sad as she sat at the conference table. "Are you happy now?" she said bitterly. "It's funny, Angela, really. Not funny in a humorous way, but funny in a strange way. You sound bitter and resentful, although, logically, I should be the one who sounds bitter and resentful. But I didn't." She sounded annoyed at my flippant attitude. "You got what you wanted. You got rid of me and kept the apartment and $7 million. I shook my head. "But that's not what I wanted, Angie. I wanted a wife who would be faithful, loving, and devoted to me. not one who would open her legs to a scumbag like Andrew Carter and help him steal $60,000 from me. She sighed. I'm sorry, Dave. I know I screwed up. I'm angry, but mostly at myself, I guess. I was hoping we could have gone to counseling, but you didn't want to go through with it. I don't blame you, though, but I wish I could, so that you. She began to cry, unable to continue. I'm sorry, Angie, but the level of disrespect you showed me, I don't think any amount of counseling could have fixed that, including the fact that you forced your lover to pretend to be me in order to steal from me, well, from us, I guess. It was his idea, she said. But like I said, I'm really sorry for what I did. Are you still working for your boss? She nodded. Yes, Carter quit and left. I think his wife forced him to do it. But that was before she received the package of information you sent her. From what I heard, she gave him a real scandal. The police were called, as I said. What's next for you, Angie? I have a federal trial in a couple of months. I'm scared. With wire fraud and wire fraud charges, my lawyer said I could get up to 30 years in prison, maybe more if I'm convicted of bank fraud. Whenever I had difficulties, I could always rely on you for help or advice. She started crying, so I gave her a tissue from the box on the table. She thanked me. Now, I could have said nothing, but I didn't. I spoke for two reasons. Firstly, I still had some feelings for her, and also this could be my chance to get revenge on Carter, who ruined my marriage, to get some pleasure and steal from me. Angie, you don't have to sit in jail for a long time, you know. She looked at me expectantly. How? What do you mean? Well, you know how in state courts there is testimony for the state where someone accused of a crime can provide evidence against another defendant for a reduced sentence. I'm pretty sure they have the exact same deal at the federal level. Just make an appointment with a lawyer to set something up. They'll probably want you to plead guilty or no contest, and then you'll just tell them what you told me about how Carter practically forced you to steal money from the account. She looked delighted. Oh, Dave, do you think this will work? I shrugged. I don't know about this, but what do you have to lose? She agreed, and her lawyer negotiated a deal with federal prosecutors. She didn't plead innocent, she pleaded guilty, and only received 5 years in the Federal Correctional Institution in Bryan, Texas. Carter's lawyer tried to stop the deal but couldn't, and with evidence from bank security cameras where he pretended to be me and signed a document at the bank, and evidence provided by Angela, his decision to plead not guilty was ultimately against him, and he received 30 years in prison and a fine of $100,000. Gotta love these federal courts. No parole for this scoundrel. When they compared his fingerprints, they discovered for themselves that Carter was an alias, and he had active arrest warrants under his real name, so his time in federal prison became even longer. You know, Carter or Minton did me a favor. Life in my apartment without Angela has become calm, and everything is the way I want. For example, I love listening to classical music on the only station in Houston that broadcasts classical music, Houston Public Media. Angela didn't like it, claiming it was an old man's music. When I tried to pick up a book, she always seemed to want me to do something interesting instead. If I was showering, changing, and putting clothes in the laundry basket, and she had just loaded the washing machine, she would grumble about how she had just loaded the machine and how the dirty clothes would be in the laundry basket until the next wash. I always thought, who the hell cares? But he didn't say anything because he didn't want her to throw one of her quiet, drawn-out tantrums. So I listened to HPM. They play Elegy in Memory of Stephen Lawrence, conducted by Philip Herbert, performed by the Chaink Orchestra. I've never heard this music before. If Angela still lived here, I wouldn't hear her now. Angela's new location was fairly close to Houston, less than 100 miles northwest of here. But I am not going to visit her or write to her. Why should I? She's in the past. Am I going to start dating again? Eventually, but for now, I enjoy my life as a newly single man too much to think about romance. Additionally, I wouldn't feel comfortable entering into a serious relationship before getting more counseling from my therapist. Plus, I now have $7 million, which will make me a target for potential gold diggers. I didn't burn a bitch or a bastard. Why would I stoop to their level or risk ending up in prison? As my therapist said during one of my sessions, yes, I understand that what happened to you hurts, and you probably want revenge on your ex and her lover. But if you do anything, you will end up in prison yourself. And even if, hypothetically speaking, you weren't there when he was robbed and both arms and legs were broken, and you had a perfect alibi, the police still wouldn't believe him. After all, someone who was, for example, at a card game will not stand it and will tell everything, and you will all end up in shit. Hiring a killer might not work for you either. I remember reading about a hitman who suddenly found Christ and reported all his clients to the authorities, so you never know. I confess that I thought about hiring someone to break Carter's bones and even thought about hiring an assassin, but his advice helped me give up on this stupid idea. So, the music has just ended. I make myself some real tea the way I like it, and I'm going to watch a movie that Angela won't ruin with her chatter. Sitting by the large windows of my tranquil apartment, watching the beautiful sunset over Houston, while Angela is in her prison cell and Carter is in his cell at the federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. Why outside of Texas? Something to do with the fact that he evaded trial under his real name, so he was considered a possible fugitive and sent to a maximum security prison. He'll have the same look for over 30 damn years. You suck, Andy, baby, I said out loud and chuckled to myself. What's next? The radio is off. I have a big plate of British biscuits and some real British tea, and I'm about to watch a Wallace and Gromit movie without any interruptions. Damn, Grace, and I'm living my best life. Do I miss what I had with Angela? Yes, I would be lying if I said I didn't miss her, but every moment I miss her less and less. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next